Imagine a student vanishes into thin air, leaving behind a trail of whispers and unsettling theories. In December 1946, Paula Jean Welden walked into the Vermont wilderness and was never seen again. Was it a calculated escape, a tragic accident, or something far more sinister involving a mysterious drifter? We're diving deep into the conflicting clues that have kept this case cold for almost 80 years. Welcome to Case Files of the Missing, where the search for answers does not end with time. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you stand along Route 9 outside Bennington, Vermont, and look toward the rising slopes of the Green Mountains, the landscape feels quiet in a way that holds stories. Dense forests stretch for miles. Old hiking routes wind through ridgelines that fade into shadow long before the day feels finished. And in early December, daylight disappears quickly, turning ordinary trails into places where distance and silence can swallow a person almost instantly. On a Sunday afternoon in 1946, an 18-year-old college student stepped away from campus for what appeared to be a simple walk. She never came back. Her name was Paula Jean Welden. Over the decades, her disappearance would become one of the most discussed unsolved missing persons cases in Vermont history. Often associated with the mysterious cluster of vanishings later called the Bennington Triangle. But when Paula disappeared, there was no legend, no mystery brand, no online theories. There was only a young woman, a winter trail, and a timeline that suddenly went silent. Tonight, we're going to walk through what is known, carefully, clearly, and without dramatization. We'll examine the environment, the search efforts, and the most enduring theories. Did Paula leave by choice and start a new life? Did something happen to her in the mountains themselves? Or did she encounter someone who changed the course of that afternoon forever? In the mid-1940s, southwestern Vermont was still deeply rural. Small communities sat miles apart. Long stretches of forest surrounded narrow roads. And hikers relied more on memory and instinct than modern navigation tools. Years later, people would refer to this region as the Bennington Triangle, a term tied to several disappearances between the mid-1940s and early 1950s. But Paula's case came first, before the pattern had a name. Paula was 18 years old and attending Bennington College. She came from Stamford, Connecticut, and was described by classmates as thoughtful, independent, and artistic. College life represented a new chapter, one that brought both opportunity and adjustment. On December 1, 1946, she worked earlier in the day before returning to her dormitory. That afternoon, she reportedly told her roommates she planned to go for a walk or hike, something brief, something ordinary. There was nothing in her routine that suggested a major departure from her life. She left wearing a red parka with a fur-trimmed hood, blue jeans, and white sneakers. She also wore a small gold wristwatch. Those details matter because they shaped every search effort that followed. Paula left campus shortly after mid-afternoon. At some point, she accepted a ride from a motorist who dropped her off along Route 9 near the area, where she intended to access the Long Trail, a famous hiking route that runs through Vermont's mountains. Witness accounts later described seeing a young woman matching Paula's description walking along the trail corridor that afternoon. One man recalled a brief conversation where she asked about the length of the trail. This moment, sometime around late afternoon, would become the last firmly anchored point in her timeline. After that, the narrative dissolves into uncertainty. At first, Paula's absence didn't immediately trigger panic. Her roommate assumed she might be studying elsewhere or visiting friends. But as hours passed and night arrived, concern grew. By the next day, it was clear something was wrong. Searchers began combing the surrounding terrain, volunteers, locals, and authorities moving through woods that were already turning cold and unforgiving. And then came a detail that would complicate everything. Snow began to fall later that evening, covering potential tracks and obscuring any signs of movement. A young woman had vanished in daylight, and the landscape erased her path almost immediately. When investigators confront a missing persons case with little physical evidence, one of the first theories considered is voluntary disappearance. Did Paula decide to leave? In 1946, disappearing was both easier and harder than it is today. There were fewer digital records, fewer cameras, fewer tracking systems. A person could theoretically step into another town and begin again. But practical realities still existed. Someone starting a new life would typically need money, a plan, and preparation. And Paula's departure did not appear planned for long-term absence. She left in casual clothing, with minimal belongings, suggesting she expected to return later that day. Over the years, rumors have circulated about possible stress, personal struggles, or dissatisfaction with college life. But rumors alone don't establish motive. From what is known publicly, there were no clear indicators that Paula had arranged transportation, secured housing elsewhere, or left messages indicating she intended to vanish voluntarily. That doesn't make the runaway theory impossible, but it places it in tension with the practical details of her disappearance. Many long-term missing persons cases accumulate reported sightings over time. People believe they've seen the missing individual in another state, another city, another decade. But sightings can be unreliable, memory changes, faces blur together. And once a case becomes widely known, individuals may unintentionally project familiarity onto strangers. Without strong confirmation, sightings remain possibilities, not proof. So while the runaway theory persists, it raises more questions than answers. Why leave unprepared for winter conditions? Why disappear without resources? And why has no verified trace ever emerged afterward? Those questions lead many observers toward another possibility, one tied not to choice, but to circumstance. Whenever someone disappears in an isolated area, two possibilities stand side by side: the environment itself, or another person. Paula was alone on a trail in late afternoon winter light. That environment created vulnerability, not only to weather and terrain, but to chance encounters. A lone hiker can appear approachable, especially near trailheads or roadside access points. And in 1946, a person could move through the region with little oversight. Over the decades, various local figures have been discussed in connection with the case. People whose statements changed or whose presence near the area raised eyebrows. But public information never solidified into a clear, prosecutable narrative. The absence of physical evidence leaves every theory balanced on speculation. At the same time, the mountains themselves offer a powerful explanation. Winter conditions arrive early. Trails twist through dense forest. A single misstep can lead someone off a marked path and into terrain that becomes difficult to navigate even in daylight. If Paula became lost or injured, especially after sunset, exposure could have become a serious risk. Search efforts in the 1940s lacked many tools used today. No drones, no thermal imaging, limited coordination across jurisdictions. And in wilderness cases, time is often the most critical factor. The idea that Paula may have succumbed to the environment remains one of the most straightforward explanations, even though it offers no closure. Unsolved cases often hinge on small details that seem minor at first, but grow significant over time. Paula left campus shortly after mid-afternoon. She was reportedly seen progressing along the trail area later in the day. And by early evening, as darkness approached, the timeline goes silent. This narrow window between late afternoon and sunset is where everything likely changed. If she turned back, she should have reappeared. If she continued forward, she entered increasingly isolated terrain. If she encountered someone, it likely happened when daylight faded and visibility decreased. Conflicting accounts have complicated attempts to reconstruct that day. Some witnesses described similar clothing. Others remembered brief conversations. But memory is imperfect, especially when recollections are gathered after the fact and shaped by community discussion. A red parka sounds easy to spot. But in winter woods at dusk, colors flatten into shadow. Dense evergreen branches can hide movement quickly. A person just a few yards off a trail can become nearly invisible. So the absence of additional sightings does not necessarily mean Paula left the area. It may simply reflect how quickly someone can disappear from view in that terrain. Another factor often overlooked is the era itself. Search and rescue methods were less standardized. Communication between agencies was slower. Documentation practices varied. Some historians believe Paula's disappearance influenced how Vermont later approached statewide public safety coordination, a reminder that unsolved cases can still shape future systems. Nearly 8 decades later, Paula Jean Welden's disappearance remains unresolved. What we still don't know is simple and deeply unsettling. Did she leave the trail voluntarily? Did she become lost in terrain that concealed her forever? Did a chance encounter alter the course of that afternoon? The timeline still holds a gap, a moment where confirmed movement becomes silence. And until that gap is filled, Paula remains one of Vermont's most enduring missing persons cases. She left for a walk. She asked about the trail. And somewhere between late afternoon and nightfall, the path ahead vanished. This is Case Files of the Missing, where the search for answers does not end with time. For more intriguing missing person and cold case stories, please like, comment, and subscribe.